In this video, we're going to be going over cards that use counters on monsters on the field to apply their effects, be it by placing them, removing them, or just benefiting from having them at all. And at number 10, we have Royal Magical Library. This card came out in the same set that introduced counters as a mechanic to the game all the way back in 2002. Royal Magical Library has the effect to place a spell counter on itself every time a spell card is activated. You can then remove 3 spell counters from this card to draw 1 card. Though activating 3 cards seems a bit too much to draw a single card, this card's main strength comes from the fact that its effect is not once per turn. This has led to this card being the centerpiece in a variety of FTK setups throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's history, and probably made a few other cards get on the ban list because of its existence. The first instance of this was with Butterfly Dagger Elma and Gearfried the Iron Knight. If Elma is equipped with Gearfried, it'll destroy itself due to Gearfried's effect, then return to the hand due to its own effect. This can be done indefinitely, which means that if you achieve this game state with Royal Magical Library on the field, you will be able to get an infinite amount of spell counters. You can then draw through your whole deck with Library's effect, letting you win through Exodia. This combo led to Butterfly Dagger Elma getting placed on the Forbidden list, and it's been there to this day. This is how most Royal Magical Library abuse happened, exploiting a loop to indefinitely activate spell cards to cycle through their whole deck. Later on, during GOAT format, one of the most popular retro formats nowadays, this card would be the centerpiece of the Library FTK used with Reversal Quiz and Black Pendant to win the game instead. The card went on to be a contributing factor to Magical Explosion FTK, Gishki FTK, Monarch FTK, and others, before disappearing completely around 2017. The release of more hand traps and their popularity, as well as restrictions of multiple library enablers, made these kinds of strategies too unreliable. So despite having a rich history, Royal Magical Library hasn't been playable in half a decade, and this is why it holds just the number 10 spot on this list. And at number 9, we have one of the newest pieces of support for the Alien archetype, Alien Shocktrooper M-Frame, which is a Link 2 monster with 2 good arrows, bottom left and bottom right, 1900 attack, and can be made with any 2 reptile monsters, not just aliens. This card's first effect is, at spell speed 2, to place 8 counters on monsters in the field up to the level the monster discards to activate the effect. This was a very welcome addition to the Alien archetype, as lots of its cards affect cards with 8 counters on them, like Cosmic Slicer Zeral, preventing them from activating their effects. However, this card's second effect is what makes it an extremely powerful combo enabler in reptile decks. When Alien Shocktrooper M-Frame is destroyed, it can special summon reptile monsters from the deck up to the number of monsters your opponent controls holding A counters. Not only is this an amazing floating effect, it triggers when this card is destroyed by card effects from either player too. Reptile combo decks would combine Ogdoadex, Reptilians, and Aliens to first summon Bishbulkin, who has the effect to flood your opponent's field with tokens. Then Alien Shocktrooper will load them with A counters, and you destroy your own Shocktrooper with cards like Unchained Abomination or Mecha Phantabisa Rorodon. It'd float into multiple reptiles from your graveyard to let you make Reptilian Echidna, who lets you add reptile monsters from your deck to your hand up to the number of monsters with 0 attack your opponent controls. And that just so happens to be the stat line of the Bishbulkin tokens. And last, Reptilian Hydra would draw that many cards on top of that too, by destroying the tokens with her effect. But even if this combo makes you go plus 10, it still requires you to fill your deck with Alien, Reptilian, and Ogdoadic cards, making sure it'd be never much more than a fragile, funny combo deck. And at number 8, we have Seraphim Papillion. This is an insect Link 3 monster with fairly decent arrows, 2100 attack, and can be made with any 2 monsters with different names. Seraphim has 2 effects, the first which activates when it's Link summoned, where it gains a counter for every insect monster used for its Link summon, and also 200 attack for each counter on it. The second one lets you remove 1 counter from it to special summon a level 4 lower insect monster from the graveyard in defense position as a quick effect. Though it may sound like an insane Link climbing tool for an insect deck at first, this card can only use 1 of its effects per turn, so you can't use its effect to special summon in the same turn you gain the counters. This card suffered for years due to a lack of decent insect archetypes, the most recent one being Insectors lots of years ago. However, this card would finally receive a home in late 2021 when B-Troopers, a TCG exclusive archetype, was released. The first wave of B-Troopers support brought the insect type lots of good starters, extenders, and even archetypal hand traps. However, the one thing they lacked was a good boss monster to end on. This is where Seraphim Papillion comes in, as the best Link 3 B-Troopers could end on. Papillion's effect was really good because lots of little insect B-Trooper decks played as combo pieces also happened to have interruption effects while on the field, making the card's revive effect pretty threatening. B-Trooper Scale Bomber could tribute an insect to destroy an opponent's monster that had just activated its effect, similar to Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. Battle Wasp Sting the Poison could negate a monster effect for the same cost, not unlike Effect Veiler. Since Papillion could come out with at least 2 counters, it would guarantee you could kill your opponent by linking into Axico Talker if it managed to live until your next turn. Unfortunately, this card's usage died completely as B-Troopers vanished from the meta, with Predaplant Verde Anaconda ban, as they relied on it to summon DPE way too much to supplement their weak end boards. And at number 7, we have Gateway of the Six. the only spell on this list. Gateway of the Six is a continuous spell that gains 2 Bushido counters every time a 6 samurai monster is summoned. Then, as many times as you want per turn, you can remove a number of Bushido counters from the card to activate one of its effects. For 2 counters, you can target a 6 samurai or a Shien monster in the field and make it gain 500 attack. For 4 counters, you can add a 6 samurai monster from your deck or graveyard to your hand, and for 6 counters, you can revive a Shien monster in your graveyard. The most important effect on this is the second one, which landed this card on the limited list as soon as the legendary 6 samurais came out. 6 samurai decks would abuse their easily special summonable monsters to spam the field and make legendary 6 samurai Shien, which would all feed counters to Gateway, refueling your hand along the way while also enabling easy OTKs. The deck was still good enough to see play through most of 2011 and 2012, even with just 1 Gateway, though drawing it was basically guaranteed a win if it stuck the board. Since Gateway of the Six can add from either deck or graveyard, it enabled an infinite loop for materials with legendary 6 samurai Shinai and legendary 6 samurai Mizuho, both of which had the effect to special summon themselves to the field if the other was on the board. These two tend to be the main feature of modern 6 samurai decks. Though Gateway of the Six is still limited to this day, it received a Searcher during the Link era with Great General of the 6 Samurai, a Link 2 which can add it from your deck to your hand at the cost of a discard. But despite the potential of the combo, this deck is kept in check by the same thing that keeps the previous loop abuser in check, its fragility. And at number 6, we have Mythical Beast Jackal King. This card is a level 6 Dark Spellcaster Pendulum monster with decent stats and 2400 attack and 1400 defense. It has a Pendulum scale of 4, which is generally pretty bad in Pendulum decks, and a scale effect, which, if you have no cards in your other Pendulum zone, you can destroy Jackal King to special summon a Mythical Beast Pendulum monster from your extra deck. What really makes this card gain its spot on this list is the monster effect though. Jackal King gains 2 spell counters every time a spell card is activated, and he can negate an opponent's monster's effect and destroy it at the cost of removing 2 spell counters from anywhere on the field. What's great about this effect is that not only does it not require you to remove counters specifically from Jackal, letting it come to the field with its negate ready, it's also a soft once per turn. Fielding multiple Jackal Kings has been a legitimate win condition in Pendulum decks. This card benefits heavily from being part of the Mythical Beast archetype, which makes it easily searchable through Mythical Beast Master Cerberus, who also puts himself in the extra deck while searching Jackal, setting up your Pendulum summon. And due to being a level 6 spellcaster, it can also be milled with Magician's Souls to be brought back later down the line for protection. Jackal King has earned his spot in Pendulum decks as not only a great monster to end on, but also the deck's primary way to play around Nibiru the Primal Being, since it's easily summoned before you get 5 summons. When it was released, it was mainly featured in Pendulum Magicians, but it would later become heavily associated with the next spot on this list. And at number 5, we've got Endymion, the Mighty Master of Magic. The central member of the Endymion archetype, as well as the face of Pendulum decks throughout most of Master Rule 4. Endymion is a level 7 Dark Spellcaster Pendulum monster with 2800 attack and a scale of 8. As a scale, Endymion can remove 6 spell counters from your field to special summon itself in the Pendulum zone, then he can destroy cards on the field up to the number of cards you control that mention spell counters in their text. He also gains spell counters equal to the number of cards destroyed. As a monster, Endymion can negate a spell trap by returning a monster with spell counters to the hand, then you get to place however spell counters that were on that card on top of Endymion. It cannot be targeted or destroyed by card effects while it holds a spell counter, and also, if it gets beaten over by battle, you can add any normal spell card from your deck to your hand. Endymion is the full package. No wonder he's become synonymous with pendulums for a large period of time. Endymion's soft once per turn spell and trap card negate goes extremely well with Jackals, letting you cover all types of cards. Not only is he a protected negate beatstick with an amazing floating effect, but his effects are also all useful while going second. Pendulum decks have often struggled going second due to a little space they have to fit in hand traps. However, Endymion's ability to do well going both first and second makes sure they're not completely out of the game if they lose the die roll. Not only can it be a complete field wipe, it also lets the deck play under Mystic Mine. Endymion's effect on the scale is counted as a spell and not a monster effect, letting it be activated even while monster effects are prevented by the mine. And at number 4, we have Gameciel, the Sea Turtle Kaiju. Gameciel's stats don't matter as much, as most of the times it saw play due to being the weakest Kaiju monster with 2200 attack. This is important because Kaijus have the effect to special summon themselves to your opponent's side of the field by attributing one of their monsters. This gets around pretty much all kinds of protection a monster can have, letting you remove problematic boss monsters like Dragoon or the Arrival at the small cost of going -1 in the process. But what many people don't know is that Gameciel has a second effect which is only usable if you're playing other Kaiju cards. When your opponent activates a card or effect, you can remove 2 Kaiju counters from anywhere on the field to negate and banish that card, just like Makaba, a card that's seen heavy play throughout the years too, but without even a once per turn on it. But how are you supposed to get these counters when Gameciel himself can't place them? This is where Kyoto Waterfront comes in. This field spell gains 1 counter every time a card is sent from the field to the graveyard, so it's pretty easy to gain counters by just link summoning once it's on the field. Once it has 3 counters on itself, it can search any Kaiju monster, and it can also remove 1 counter from itself to prevent its destruction. This card not only searches Gameciel, but also fuels his repeatable negate. The only reason why you don't really see this as often in the meta is because Kaiju monsters are usually summoning themselves to your opponent's field, and you don't want to give them Gamecieled if they can use its effect. However, this combo saw play in World Legacy decks for a few years. These decks would spam link summons to end on Yugioh Skull Dread and Kyoto Waterfront in the field. Yugioh's effect would then, if you had made it with 3 or more monsters, let you special summon a monster from your hand to the field. The best one being Gameciel, who'd be ready to negate whatever your opponent did with the counters from the field spell. And at number 3, we have Predaplant Dragostapelia. This card is a level 8 fusion monster with 2700 attack and can be made with any fusion monster plus any dark monster. Dragostapelia has the effect to place a predator counter on a monster your opponent controls once per turn, and these counters turn any level 2 or higher monster into level 1. In addition, Dragostapelia also negates the effects of all monsters with predator counters on them, so it can be used as a quick effect negation on your opponent's turn, like a Forbidden Chalice. Dragostapelia mainly saw play as a super polymerization target against fusion decks when it came out, since it has generic materials. Super Poly lets you use your opponent's monsters, so you could potentially rip apart an entire board without your opponent being able to respond. However, it was usually too hard to be used otherwise, since most good fusion decks would either restrict themselves into the archetype, or just have better negation options available. It being a Predaplant monster also did it no favors, since the other good Predaplant monsters don't interact with predator counters either, and were only used to make rank 3s and search Brilliant Fusion. However, with the release of the new Albaz support, this card began to see heavy play as something to actually end on. Loopbellion and Albion are fusion monsters that perform another fusion when summoned while using materials from your graveyard or even the Banish Zone. Also, most of the archetype cards are dark, so it became trivially easy to summon Dragostapelia on the first turn. Not only that, but the new Predaplant support also finally gave Predaplants a good payoff for having monsters your opponent controls with predator counters, like tributed them to either summon monsters from the deck, or even negating your opponent's activations. This card's set to see more and more play with the release of the Tearlament archetype, whose monsters all fusion summon by placing cards from their hand, field, or graveyard on the bottom of the deck. And at number 2, we have Borreload Savage Dragon. Borreload is a level 8 synchro monster with the effect that when it's synchro summoned, you can equip a link monster from your graveyard to it, and it gains attack equal to half that monster's attack, and Borrow counters equal to its link rating. You can then remove one of these Borrow counters to negate an opponent's card or effect on a hard once per turn. Borreload Savage is a beast and has seen heavy play pretty much ever since it first came out. Level 8 has always been one of the easiest levels for single monsters to climb into, and pretty much every deck with a tuner has ran this card. Notably, at first in Dragon Link and Pendulum Magician, since they could easily make Borreload with just Rocket Tracer and Harmonizing Magician respectively. Then came Halqifibrax, which when comboed with Auroradon, let you climb from any 2 monsters including a tuner to both Borreload Savage Dragon and Herald of Arc Light. It was also a mainstay in Adamancipators when the deck dominated TCG, since they were also really good at spamming level 8 synchros. And the only deck who contested it at the time, Synchro Eldritch, would also end on it through Halqifibrax combos. The only reason why this card is not number 1, despite Dragon Link still being a big deck in the meta, is because this card is not as widely used as it once was. Other synchro decks in meta right now either can't go into it due to its archetype restrictions, or just would rather end on a level 10 synchro instead, like Baronne de Fleur. And at number 1, we've got Selene, Queen of the Master Magicians. Selene is by far the card on this list that sees the most play in the meta nowadays. She's a Link 3 light spellcaster with the best arrows you could ask for, all pointing downwards, and 1850 attack. She can be made with any 2 monsters, including at least 1 spellcaster monster. Selene has the effect to gain counters in the field up to the number of spell cards in the field or graveyards when link summoned, and then with a quick effect, she can remove 3 counters to special summon a spellcaster monster from your hand or graveyard to a zone it points to in defense position. She also has a last effect which is only relevant in pendulum decks, where if an Endymion card is on the field, it cannot be targeted for attacks. When Selene first came out, she became the glue that held pendulum strategies together. These decks all had plenty of spellcaster monsters to easily make her, and she provided amazing arrows to maximize the power of the pendulum summon. Just being a link monster that could hold spell counters was already a lot, as that is why these decks ran Daybreaker before Selene came out. Though this card would hardly stay exclusive to these decks, as it sees play in much more meta-relevant threats as well. Even if the requirement to be made with a spellcaster seems restrictive at first, lots of decks can use it by simply summoning Halqifibrax, then bringing out Effect Veiler from the deck. Then they can make Selene and bring back Effect Row from the graveyard to make a Link 4. There's just insane value in getting either Appaloosa to set up or Access Code Talker to break your opponent's board, all for the low cost of 2 monsters you use to make Halqifibrax. This combo itself made Sky Strikers viable even when their best spell card was banned. Now they could just normal summon any of their tuner hand traps and kill your opponent with access code, something the deck has always struggled with. And even in decks without tuners to make Hulk, this card could see play because of the Link 2 Charmers. These Link 2 monsters can summon a monster from your opponent's graveyard to your field with the same attribute as themselves. Since they're all spellcasters, they let you link climb into Selene with ease. With the release of the Dark Attribute one in a recent set, almost any deck can easily go into her now. This makes Selene one of the most used extra deck monsters in the meta, who just so happens to use counters to fuel her main effect. Alright, and that's the list. If you think there's any other counter-using cards that should have definitely been on this list at the top of the cards I talked about, or if you have any ideas for future videos just like this one, I'd love to hear about those things down in the comment.